David has been the main community manager for Asterisk for a very, very long time, and a lead trainer as well. He's been training all over the world for years now, and he's a very gifted speaker, and he decided to basically teach us all how to actually improve our presentation skills as well by writing a book, as he will tell us in a minute. So without further ado, please, David, enlighten us now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lorenzo. It's a privilege to be here at the first JanusCon, and it's a privilege for all of us, isn't it? We'll be able to look back and tell our grandchildren we're at the first JanusCon. And we went to the social evening last night, which was excellent. And not only is it a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this, but I'm excited to see the conversations develop around the whole VoIP on the beach theme, about helping each other and doing more community stuff. And with that in mind, just a couple of things to point out. You've perhaps seen the URL, tiny URL /VoIP on the beach, or bit.ly/VoIP on the beach. Is that back up again at the moment, Frederic? Okay, Frederic is working on that. We should have that back up where you can record your ideas. The other thing I wanted to point out is there's a gentleman here. I don't think he's in the audience right now, but Ruben Hom is here from the Open VoIP Alliance, and he also has that idea of us all collaborating together and helping make each other's lives easier. And so please do seek out Ruben across the course of the conference. Not only is he a good person to talk to, but he has free stickers. And everybody likes a sticker to put on their laptop at an event like this. Anyway, why are we here this morning? In my short time with you, I'd like to explore why nerds aren't heard. Because I'm convinced that when we as geeks speak to non-technical audiences, we tend to, maybe not on purpose, but in some way we tend to sabotage our own presentations to those audiences. And so here's our agenda for the brief time together. I'd like to identify the problem as I see it first. Then I'd like to explore why nerds should be heard. Why should a nerd get airtime in a non-technical audience? What are the important points there? Then I'll go through those 7 ways that geeks sabotage their own presentations. And then I'll suggest 7 protocols that if you follow them would drastically improve your presentational skills in front of a non-technical audience. How does that sound as an agenda? Is that okay? Okay, great. Saw some thumbs up. Excellent. But before we do that, we're on day 2 of the conference, and I thought it would be a nice idea for us to get to know each other just that little bit better, as you do at conferences. And so I thought a quick geometric test first thing in the morning might be very useful. This is a very easy test. All you have to do is just pick your favourite shape. That's it. That's all there is to it. Don't overanalyze it. Don't spend too long thinking about it. Just go with your favourite one. Okay. Now, by show of hands, who got the triangle? Okay, keep your hands up. Have a look around at the audience. See all the triangle people, because these are the ambitious and directed people. It's the shape that says it. You know, they know where they're going, and they've probably got a plan to get there as well. Who were the squares? Expected to see a proportion of squares. Keep your hands up. Have a quick look at the squares there. The squares are the detailed, conscious people. They're very precise. They like to colour right up to the lines and fill in all the details. And who were the circles in the audience? That's a high proportion for a group like this. Just keep your hands in the air. Have a good look round. These are the people. They're very inclusive. Maybe they're involved in presentations or giving training, as well as their technical stuff. And what about the wiggly lines? Okay, this is the most important group, okay? Keep your hands up, because these people have an unhealthy obsession. No, keep your hands up. It's either with Taylor Swift, did I get that right? Tom Cruise, or occasionally real-time communications. It's probably the real-time communications group, isn't it, in this particular case? Anyway, fortunately, the talk does apply to all groups. So, let's have a look at the problem as I see it. The problem is that if you're a geek, there are advantages to being a geek. For instance, you get to wear the interesting t-shirts, don't you, with the in-geek jokes. You get to go to websites like Think Geek and buy geeky stuff. You may even get to put stickers on your laptop, and even stickers up in your work area. And you can have a great time. Your boss might even buy you pizza on a Friday afternoon. However, while you're sat there in that darkened corner of the room doing the geek stuff, round the corner is the sales guy. Now, I know that particular man's not a sales guy. He's Ron Burgundy, isn't he, from the Anchorman? But I'm using as a representation. He's a sales guy, and He's round the corner with his fully expensed company car. He's getting paid loads. He's going out. He's flying around the place, having a great time, while you're there slaving away and making this stuff. And having worked in a few technical companies, I began to think to myself, well, there's a problem here, because the guys that make this stuff, that support this stuff, that really keep the company going, are not looked after as well as the sales guy. Now, that doesn't mean I think that the sales guys should be paid less. Far from it. I think sales is a skill and a very important thing in itself. But I do think that technical people deserve to be paid more, recognised more, and rewarded more. Okay, that doesn't mean more than the salespeople or less than the salespeople, just more. And that's my mission, is to help geeks. I want geeks to be able to be more, because if you are more, you can do more. And if you do more, you can have more success in its various forms. And the thing about a conference like this is it's great that we can talk geek to geek. However, when we get out of this closed bubble, when we get out of this environment and get back into the real world, we are going to find ourselves giving presentations to a less technical audience. And this is the nub of my presentation. So for all those people that say, oh, you know, I'm a bit worried that I'm going to find something wrong with my presentation, this, what I'm giving you here, I mean, it's useful, but it's not aimed at geek to geek communication, okay? Because there's a special wavelength that geeks have. This is more presentations to non-technical audiences. And it could be a job interview. It could be something like telling your non-tech colleagues what you do in the organisation, or it could even be a sales presentation. In other words, it's a time where you're presenting to people, perhaps decision makers, who are less technical than you. And of course, when you're that successful that you need to sell your company or attract funding in for the next growth cycle, again, the likelihood is that the decision makers in that process may not be technical people. So if you're a geek that can speak, not only are you in a better position to communicate with these non-technical audiences, but I would submit to you that the confidence that you grow by presenting better will actually rub off into other areas of your life, and you'll find yourself more successful in those parts as well. So here's one of the problems. Have you ever had this? Has anybody ever had this business of trying to watch a YouTube video and maybe the bandwidth isn't quite there, okay? Or your download speed or whatever it is. So what I would say to you is that the reason that happens is that you've got a poor connection. I think we'd all agree there. And I would submit to you that the problem with a lot of geek presentations is they don't spend time at the beginning making a connection with their audience. Because the broader you make the connection, the fatter you make that bandwidth, and the more emphasis you put on making it into a duplex connection where not only are you giving information, but you've also got a channel to receive the information from your audience. The more you do that, the better your presentation will flow. By the way, just in terms of interaction, if you have any particular questions, do feel free to ask them at any time. There'll be a time at the end as well, but I do fully encourage audience participation to the extent that I brought some Italian lion bars with me. They actually roar in Italian, these lion bars. So that if anybody has any questions or even answers any questions, they get a lion bar. By the way, there's more than 3. Don't worry. If the third person has answered a question, there will be more lion bars there. Okay, so these protocols, I want to briefly introduce them to you now, and then I'll come back to them at the end. Okay, the first protocol is purpose. Very often when... Oh, was that a question, or was that just somebody holding... No, that was somebody holding their hand in the air. Fair enough. Very often when a geek is asked to deliver a presentation, the first thing they tend to do is just to hack around on PowerPoint or Prezi or Keynote or whatever it is without thinking duly about the purpose of the presentation. And I would suggest to you that if you thought about having a learning contract between you, the presenter, the person that asked you to deliver the presentation, who I would call the sponsor, and the audience, if you've got a learning contract in place between those 3 groups of people where everybody was agreed on what you were going to do and the outcomes you were trying to achieve, then your presentation would be that much more successful. Even the act of talking to the person who asked you to do the presentation and getting a little bit more detail from them can be a very useful thing. Then there is the planning your presentation. And by the way, Lorenzo, can you just do me a little glass of water, please? I'm getting slightly dry in the mouth as we go through. The plan for the presentation is all about structuring your presentation and making sure you take maximum advantage of your audience's attention span. And as you perhaps know, well, in fact, can anybody tell me, when is an audience attention span at its highest? Any ideas? To win, thank you very much, Lorenzo. To win a Lion Bar here, the stakes are high. Go ahead, sir. Well, that's a very good point. When they care. Yeah, can you give that man a Lion Bar? Yes, they do need to care. They need, well, you can keep it for later, sir. They need to be helped to understand why they care. Anything else on attention spans? When naturally are we most interested? At the beginning. That's another great place. Beginnings and endings, primacy and recency are two very, very key things. Goodness me, we've got a third one there. Go ahead. When they're engaged. Excellent. Yes, in fact, there's the third one, Lorenzo. Don't worry, there are more of these Lion Bars around the place. So, goodness me. Okay. When they're having fun. People definitely learn more when they're having fun. That's very true, sir. I'm going to carry on from here after we give you that exciting Lion Bar. One to the gentleman just there. Goodness me, almost the entire 2 rows at the front are now full of Lion Bars. Okay, so we need to think about the way we plan our presentation, the way we deliver it, because definitely beginnings and endings are key places for information. Okay, that's why in the news broadcast you always have the headlines at the beginning and a summary at the end. That's why the first TV advert in an ad break and the last one are more expensive than the rest, because the advertisers understand that beginnings and endings are more important. By the way, have you ever seen ads where they take the first one and the last one? So the first ad is about, I don't know, a particular holiday company, and then the last ad before the programme comes back on. That's because they understand the power of attention spans. That's planning. Then there's preparing your presentation. And when I say preparing, I'm talking about not just going through the motions of getting your slide presentation together, but I'm talking about preparing in terms of knowing your audience, knowing the venue, and knowing the tech that's going to be involved. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because when people have seen this presentation before, I've majored on the keys to people's memories. And so this time I thought I'd mix it up a bit and talk about preparing for the kind of people in your audience. Then there's practicing. I'm a big fan of actually practicing out loud your presentation well ahead of ever delivering it to your target audience. Participation is the absolute key to any great presentation in terms of engagement. That was one of the things that came up, engaging your audience through the acts of participation. Actually delivering your presentation, performing it, and then the post-event protocol, the follow-up after it. So these are the 7 protocols that I've identified and boiled it down to. Just thinking about preparation. So thinking about the types of people in the audience, and I just want to use a very simplified version of something that's called the learning cycle here. And in order to do that, I would like to use the example of a brand new digital video recorder. We all love them, like TiVo type things. Let's imagine you've got a brand new digital video recorder. It was in the box. You can't wait to use it. But what are you going to do first? By show of hands, who's going to read the manual thoroughly? Okay, just have a little look around. Small proportion of people are going to do that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. That's a great thing to do. You're probably going to get a great experience. How many people are going to rip the cellophane off, plug it in, and just get going with it? That is what I expected in an audience of this nature. A few more like that. And how many are going to sit and reflect on previous digital video recorders they've owned and think about the results they're trying to achieve? The token one in the audience. Okay, well, the thing about the learning cycle is to recognise this. Number 1, there are 3 components to it: input, action, and reflection. Number 2, you can start anywhere. And as we've seen, different people in the audience like to start in different places. Some like to take the input first. They're input-orientated people. They'd like to read the manual and read up on it. Others would rather jump in, plug it in, and get going with it. They're the action-orientated people. And then lastly, there are people that will think about things before they read the manual. An example of reflection-led training is, have you ever been in a training session where the leader says, I'll tell you what, let's just take a few minutes to identify the deficiencies with our software, or what's currently wrong with what we're doing. That would be a period of reflection before you take the input and then get onto the action of changing things. So the next thing to learn is you will have your own preferences. We already saw that by the show of hands. And the mistake a lot of geeks would make is to take their preference and to project it onto the audience. And to think, right, because I'm the guy that likes to get on with it first, I'm action orientated, that's what I'm going to do in my audience. I'll actually get them doing something first. However, if you were addressing, say, a group of HR professionals, it's unusual, it's unlikely, but just in case you were, then that would be the wrong thing to do, because as a generalization, they're probably more into reflection first than anything else. So you will have a preference, audience members will have their own preferences, and sometimes you can make a sweeping generalization about a kind of audience. Other times, when you don't know, what you're going to do is actually mix it up, and you're going to have some input-led activities, some action-led activities, and some reflection-led activities to make sure you cater for all the different types of people. And the last thing is, you really need to complete the circle in order for full learning to take place, in order for it to sink in. Anyway, that's just a little bit of value on the prepare protocol. What I want to do now is look at those ways that geeks, unfortunately, sabotage their own presentations, knowingly or not. And I call it GPS, or Geek Presentation Sabotage. And the first way they do it is by being just a little bit too technical when they get in front of their audiences. And that's because in the geek world, part of the currency is how much you know and how technical you are. Well, in most audiences, people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. So getting to know the audience and getting to understand what they're looking for is key, because, as you know, all audiences, or maybe you don't, but as we will soon know, all audiences are tuned into that one radio station, WII-FM. What's in it for me? That's a classic, isn't it? All of those, everybody that's in the audience thinks, yeah, but how does this apply to me? What value am I going to get from this presentation? And unless we walk in the customer's shoes, we're not going to get to thinking about that properly. So my advice would be, is even if you've already put some thought into the technical level of your presentation, come up one level, unless you know it's a very heavily technical audience. Because if you come up one level, you can carry more people with you on your journey, and those people that do have detailed technical questions can ask you, depending on your question policy, either during the presentation or at the end afterwards, and you'll be able to address those questions, but you'll keep more of the audience with you by coming up that one technical level. What about planning? No proper planning. As I said, geeks are prone to just jump onto Prezi, PowerPoint or Keynote and get hacking and just throw stuff down on slides. And, you know, that is a process, but I would submit to you that it's not the best process for putting your presentation together. The FBI say that proper planning prevents particularly poor performance, or something along those lines anyway. And what I would do is consider the content and the structure where you're going to put the key information in, and the keys to people's memory. And you may have seen other presentations I've done where I talk about the 5 keys to getting things into people's memories. There are 5 different ways to do that. Then there is this classic one, isn't there? Being on the aeroplane just before the presentation, or the hour before your presentation, or maybe some of you are hacking on your presentation and you're doing the one after me. So I call lastminute.com, people just hacking about on it. I want you to imagine that you're on trial for something you didn't do. We won't go into the nature of what it is you didn't do, because looking around the audience could be a few different things. But let's just pretend you're on trial for doing something you didn't do. And you've hired an attorney or a lawyer, and you meet up with him the day before to go through your case. And he says, actually, I don't need you to tell me anything about your case. I find I get the best results when I just wing it. So what we'll do is we'll get in there tomorrow. I don't need to. I'll just play it by ear, and we'll see how we go. You know, we'll see how things work out for you. Would you be very pleased? No. You would want that person to have done all the preparation they possibly could, right? And so it is with a presentation. If a presentation is worth giving, it's worth properly preparing for that presentation. And there are many dimensions to preparation. Not only the type of people in your audience that I just talked about, but what about the actual venue? How's the venue going to be? Can it be blacked out properly for your presentation? Is it a small enough audience that you could use a flip chart for some interaction rather than just giving them death by PowerPoint? There's all sorts of things to consider when you're creating your presentation. And so my advice is to walk in your audience's shoes, to go through the process as if you're an audience member, to then get some meat out of that you can build into your presentation in terms of your preparation. And by the way, while we're talking about walking in people's shoes, Jack Handy, the very famous deep thinker from America, part of the Saturday Night Live team, one of his key pieces of advice is that if you're going to criticize somebody, you should really walk a mile in their shoes first. Because then, when you do criticize them, you'll be a mile away and have their shoes. I think you'll agree. It's very deep advice, very useful advice. What about beta trialing? Yes, we would beta trial software, wouldn't we? Would we beta trial software? Yeah, a few people might beta trial some software. Fair enough. Maybe you just throw it in there and see what happens. We would beta trial software, so why wouldn't we alpha and beta trial our presentations? And I would submit to you that sitting in your hotel room or on your flight, looking at your slides, thinking, yeah, I'll say that one when that slide's on, and I'll say that thing when that slide. That's not practicing, really. That might be a form of just going through it. However, practicing your presentation out loud is an important thing. If you can do it to some industry colleagues who understand your subject, so much the better. If you can't find them or they haven't got time, how about some family and friends who are on your side? And if you can't find them, how about practicing it into the voice recorder or even the video camera of your mobile phone? Because you'll find lots of things. One of the things you'll find is how long your presentation takes, and whether you need to adjust that in order to fit into the time slot. You'll also find yourself analysing the things you say and finding out that maybe there's some phrases that you stumble over or things that just don't sound right. And you would never have come across this if you didn't practice it out loud. So do practice out loud. Now, here's another one. Here's a classic mistake that geeks make. They deliver a presentation without properly involving their audience. I don't know who said that. Okay, we'll do you a lion bar afterwards, sir. That's right. You must have some participation. Participation is the absolute key for engagement. It came up very early on when we were talking. Engagement. But remember this simple equation. We all like equations. Involvement equals commitment. That's a very, very simple equation to remember. And if you involve your audience in your presentation, in other words, you do something with them, instead of to them, they will be much more committed to the outcomes that you are trying to achieve, whether that's a change of behaviour, whether it's learning new products, whatever it might be. And it can take many different forms. Questions. Questions are always great for participation, show of hands, all that kind of stuff. And then involvement in demonstrations, getting people out and involved. Now, we have in our midst an amazing storyteller, Mr. Ulla Johansson, and he'll be presenting later on. Stories are absolutely key, and let me tell you one of the reasons why. There's many reasons, but in any presentation, anything I tell you is potentially flawed and wrong, and you're very skeptical about it, and naturally there's nothing wrong with some healthy skepticism. But let me tell you something else. Anything you tell yourself is always an infallible truth. So when somebody at the front is telling you a story and you draw your own conclusions from the story, that's always a much more positive truth than any direct message that the person at the front can have given you. So if you get into the art of storytelling, that's another form of crucial participation in your presentation. So here is an idea. Brainstorm participation methods before you come to do your presentation. Think, can I get somebody involved in a demonstration? Can I have a few questions, perhaps at the front, to get people more involved? Anything you can do. Because another place is apathy. You know, when geeks sort of wash onto the stage, they're not that, involved in what they're doing. They're not kind of sold. Well, you need some enthusiasm, and the IASM of enthusiasm stands for I am sold myself. So make sure if you're going to get out on stage in front of any audience, whether it's an audience of 1 or an audience of 10, if your boss has asked you to deliver a presentation, make sure it's a presentation that you yourself can be enthusiastic about. Because attitudes are catching. Enthusiasm is catching, but apathy is also quite contagious. So you need to be careful of that. Deal with any nerves that you have. And I would submit to you, although there will be an element of nerves about going out in front of an audience, I would submit to you, if you go through all of these protocols, you will have actually dealt with a lot of your nerves by properly establishing the purpose, the plan, preparing, practicing before you get to the participation and performance, so your nerves will have somewhat evaporated by this stage. But if you are uneasy, that transmits to your audience and they might become uneasy. So you can use things like pitch, pace and pauses to modulate the delivery of your output. So check yourself, check your enthusiasm levels, check the way that you're going to excite and enthrall your audience. Last of the ways that geeks sabotage their own presentations is by failure to follow up. They go in and do a drive-by presentation, then they run away. And actually, what we need to know is, were the objectives of that presentation achieved? Whoever sponsored that presentation, did they got what they wanted out of it? 3 months later, are people using the new procedures or buying the software that you want them to buy or taking up the service? You need to investigate those things. And so there are many ways to do that. It could be the little happy sheet at the beginning, at the end of the presentation, but that's just one dimension, isn't it? We need to follow up afterwards. And so I would say, schedule a follow-up before the start of your presentation, so that you know that 3 weeks afterwards you're going to check in with various people. If it was a massive audience and you can't talk to everybody, maybe talk to 2 or 3 representative audience members. So, just in closing, I was talking about the trouble in establishing the right level of connection. Connection is so important for engagement, and so if you arrange these protocols: purpose, plan, prepare, practice, participation, performance and post-event in that special way, you get the magic ingredient, which is rapport. Establishing a rapport with your audience, making the connection, the emotional, the loving and emotional connection with your audience is so important to doing a successful presentation. And just as a negative example of this, I once watched a guy do 3 days worth of training on the Tetra mobile communication system. And in the last hour of the last day, somebody plucked up the courage to ask a question and got some value because they were able to do that. And the whole reason was the guy had not spent any time, he just dumped the technical information and had not created an environment where people felt they could interact properly. And people would have got so much more value from that if they'd have been able to do so earlier on. So I think we have time maybe for one question before I summarise. If you've got questions after that, then I can see you later. But in order to keep things on time, and we're going to have to go to Ule near the front there.
Well, I know you have a very short time span for this presentation, so I'll ask very slowly. You very, very quickly skip the part about technical levels, and that's probably the hardest part because they're very subjective and relative. So how do you handle that? How do you define the different notches you were speaking about?
I think rather than going into detail, I'll just give the general principle, and I am reiterating what I already said, because repetition is the mother of learning and the distant cousin of boredom, so I'll try and keep it. And that is that the further up, put it this way, it's more of a crime to go too deep than it is to go too light. Because by going upwards in technical level and making things more shallow, you'll be able to carry more of the audience with you. Unless in your preparation and in your plan and in your purpose, you've managed to talk to enough of the audience to establish exactly what their technical level is. And that would be the best advice I could give, is research and get to know it. But when you don't know the audience, always go upwards from where you think it should be. Because the guys who are getting frustrated and saying, I want to know the more detail, they can ask the questions and you can answer them, because you're probably an expert in what you're talking about. However, if you go too far down, no, Ule, it's a no. No.
No comment. Anyway, audiences, persons, I believe, like to feel intelligent. So if you're talking above them, you're not making that connection. I think that's the most important thing.
I think it's equally to the other way around, that if you're going too technical, you'll leave them behind and they'll just feel bored and frustrated and the what's in it for me. So I think the thing that we can agree on, Ule, and I know there's lots of things we can agree on, but the key thing would be to do the research ahead of time to get to know your audience well enough in order to hit the right technical level. Okay, just in summary very quickly, geeks that can speak rock in so many ways. Not only are they better prepared for their job interviews and for their presentations, but it rubs off into other areas of their life too. You can avoid these pitfalls that I've identified by remembering the protocols, and The rewards are there in spades for any geek that can speak. I have a book and some training, but I'm not going to major on that. If you'd like to get on the list and to know when the book is being released, and it is closer now, I've written another 2 chapters before I came along here, so get onto that URL and you can register and not only get a free report, but you'll also get told when the book comes out. And so it's been a pleasure telling you about the benefits that there are for geeks that can speak. It's been a pleasure explaining what the protocols are and how you can avoid the pitfalls by using the protocols. But most importantly, I want it to be a pleasure for you when you use these protocols and get all the rewards of a geek that can speak. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Amazing presentation as usual.